going?
Okay.
So tonight we're going to do mysticism and the eternal feminine. Now we actually did this. Let me just put this up here for a second so you see.
It's deja vu all over again.
We did this back in December of 2021, okay? And what was incredible to me is how much extra stuff has come up since then. And so that's what I tried to capture here, so you get some feeling for this. But there's just a huge amount of new things here, so that's what we're going to cover. So let's see if we can get this thing cranked up. Here we go. These are all graphics of, like, this is Picasso over here, showing the mystic or eternal feminine. And up here, I think, is Mary Magdalene. These are all, really great artists that did these things, so forth. So that's what.
That's Blake on the upper left, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So anyway, here we go. The first thing is, these are all books that have shown up in the last several years, just to give you some idea of how much more stuff there is. So when God was a Black woman and why she isn't now, okay? Just, the great cosmic mother rediscovering the religion of the earth. Prophetess of Yata, the creation of the patriarchy, clearly something that impacted women. The spiral dance, which is a rebirth of the ancient religions of the great goddess. So there is this spiral dance that people go through. They do these things all the time. The creation of feminine consciousness here. Who cooked the Last Supper? Surprise, surprise. The Goddess Bible here. And then some things got collected out of Joseph Campbell's writings on goddesses. He apparently never did anything on goddesses, but he did here and there in the other place talk about it. And so this has all been collected here. And then Atta Imam, and this is trying to see what it says. I can't. Well, anyway, it's another. Oh, I know, it's African. That's why I can't. Yeah, it's African. The role of women in Africa in different mystic rites that they have. So and this isn't everything. I just put these up here to give you some idea of what in the world is going on. And then there's on YouTube, there's just a lot of videos. So I just picked up a bunch of those here. These are all links here to every one of these. So you can, if you have the interest, you can go look and see. And I just did a sampling here of them, many more. But so what are we going to talk about here, in just to zero in so I have some focus, is Inanna, okay? So Inanna, and up here is this book, the Queen of Heaven and Earth, okay? So Inanna is the ancient Mesopotamian goddess of love, war, and fertility, associated with sensuality, procreation, divine law, political power, originally worshipped in Sumer, and she was known to the Akkadian Empire, to the Babylonians and the Assyrians as Ishtar, which leads to this confusion over, you got Ishtar and you've got Inanna, but they really were merged, and I have no idea why they had different names. And she was, her primary title was Queen of Heaven. So she was the patron goddess of the temple in the city of Uruk. And she was worshipped in three forms: morning Inanna, evening Inanna, and princely Inanna, and the former two reflecting the phases of her associated planet Venus. So Venus is the morning star and the evening star. Is that, I think so, because it's so bright, you can pick it out.
But that's also been called Lucifer.
Right, it's also been called Lucifer, right? And her most prominent symbols include the lion and the eight-pointed star. So you see these eight-pointed stars in Uruk and in Acadia, and that's all her, these eight-pointed stars. And her husband was the god Dumuzid, later known as Tammuz, and she had an attendant, and all of these things get conflated together into different entities. So she was worshipped in Sumer at least as early as 4000 BC. Okay, so that's why I picked this. I think this is the earliest, most documented, and most researched thing showing that women were right in there in terms of mystic, the eternal feminine, and being involved in any sort of spirituality. She was one of the most venerated deities in the Sumerian pantheon, with temples all across Mesopotamia, and the cult of Inanna / Ishtar may have been associated with a variety of sexual rites, and was continued by the Eastern Semitic speaking peoples, meaning the Akkadians, Syrians, and Babylonians, who succeeded and absorbed the Sumerians. And she was especially beloved by the Assyrians, who elevated her to become the highest deity in their pantheon of gods. So this is, the top of the heap, ranking above their own national god, Ashur. She's alluded to, Inanna and Ishtar is alluded to in the Torah, in the Hebrew Bible, and she greatly influenced the goddess Ashtart, and later the Phoenician goddess Astarte, who in turn possibly influenced the development of the Greek goddess Aphrodite. And Aphrodite in the Roman pantheon was Athena.
No,
No?
Venus.
Venus?
Yeah, they're all, every culture associates the same archetype basically with the same planets.
Okay.
Yeah, Aphrodite was the equivalent of Venus.
Okay. No, Aphrodite's here, but I'm saying the Roman god for Aphrodite. What did there?
That would be Venus.
Venus?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So
Thank you for asking.
basically Christianity washed it out. Otherwise, we'd still be talking about Inanna today.
Well, they absorbed it into their thing from
Yeah.
Mary.
Yeah. They used Mary instead. So Inanna appears in more myths than any other Sumerian deity, and has a huge number of alternate names comparable only to Nergal, who was one of these high-ranking gods. And so many of her myths involve her taking over the domains of other deities. She's been believed to have been given the MES, which represents all positive and negative aspects of civilization. Well, by Enki, the god of wisdom. Remember, this is Sumeria, okay? And so we have Enki and we have Elil also, as we'll see in a minute, and Gilgamesh will come in. She was also believed to have taken over her temple from An, the god of the sky, and alongside her twin brother, Utu, known as Shamash. She was the enforcer of divine justice and destroyed Mount Eba for having challenged her authority. unleashed her fury upon the gardener Shukaltida after he raped her in her sleep, and tracked down the bandit woman Balulu and killed her in divine retribution for having murdered the Muzid, who was her husband. So I guess you don't want to mess with Inanna. She's one tough cookie, okay? Ishtar, or Inanna, asked Gilgamesh to become her consort. He disdainfully refuses, so she unleashes the bull of heaven, resulting in the death of Enkidu and Gilgamesh's subsequent grappling with his own mortality. So you definitely don't want to mess with her. The most famous myth is the story of her descent into and return from the ancient Mesopotamian underworld, which was ruled by her older sister, Ereshkigal. After she reaches Ereshkigal's throne room, the 7 judges of the underworld deem her guilty and strike her dead. This is a problem. 3 days later, Ninshubur pleads with all the gods to bring Inanna back. All of them refuse her, except Enki, who sends 2 sexless beings to rescue Inanna. They escort Inanna out of the underworld, but the guardians of the underworld drag her husband, Dumuzid, down to the underworld as her replacement. And Dumuzid is eventually permitted to return to heaven for half the year, while his sister Gishtanana remains in the underworld for the other half, thus resulting in the cycle of the seasons. So here you see the first instance of, the Greeks had Persephone and Demeter, and that got, the Greeks picked up on this and captured that there. So Inanna has posed a problem for many scholars of ancient Sumer because her sphere of power contained more distinct and contradictory aspects than that of any other deity. 2 major theories regarding her origins have been proposed. The first is that Inanna is the result of a syncretism between several previously unrelated deities with totally different domains. So they get merged together somehow into Inanna. And the second explanation holds that Inanna was originally a Semitic entity who entered the Sumerian pantheon after it was already fully structured and took on all the roles that had not been assigned to other deities. The problem with this is, she took on all the powers. So the other deities that were there were really minor compared to who she was. Inanna was associated with the city of Uruk, and the symbol of a king-headed doorpost was closely associated. Ring-headed doorpost was closely associated with Inanna, and the famous Uruk vase, which was found in a deposit of cult objects, depicts a row of naked men carrying various objects, including bowls, vessels, and baskets of farm products, and bringing sheep and goats to a female figure facing the ruler. The female stands in front of Inanna's symbol of the 2 twisted reeds of the doorpost, while the male figure holds a box and stack of bowls, the latter cuneiform sign signifying the En, or the highest priest of the temple. So scholars believe that Inanna and Ishtar were originally separate, unrelated deities, but were conflated with one another during the reign of Sargon of Akkad, came to be regarded effectively as the same goddess under 2 different names. So you have Inanna's name could have been derived from Ninannak, meaning Lady of Heaven, but the cuneiform sign for Inanna is not a ligature of the signs Lady. It's Nin, and Nin and sky. Okay, These difficulties led some early Assyrian archaeologists to suggest that Inanna might have originally been a Proto-Euphratian goddess. So really very early, only later accepted into the Sumerian pantheon. And this was supported by her youthfulness, as well as the fact that unlike the other Sumerian divinities, she seemed to have initially lacked a distinct sphere of responsibilities. But all of this is really speculation. They don't know what's going on, other than she was early. The name Ishtar occurs as an element in personal names from both pre-Sargon and post-Sargon eras in Akkad, Assyrian Babylon. It's a Semitic derivation and probably related to the West Semitic god Attar, who in later inscriptions is mentioned. And the morning star may have been conceived as a male deity who presided over the arts of war, while the evening star may have been conceived as a female deity who presided over the arts of love. So among the Akkadians, Assyrians, and Babylonians, the name of the male god eventually supplanted the name of his female counterpart. But due to extensive syncretism with Inanna, the deity remained female, although her name was in the masculine form. So it suggests they don't know what's going on. And here we have, in the pre-Sargon era, the cult of Inanna was rather limited, but other experts argue she was already the most prominent deity in Uruk and other political centers with temples all over. And some of the research assumes that the original patron deity of this 4000 BC city was An. So after its dedication to Inanna, the temple seems to have housed priestesses of the goddess. And this Gwendolyn Leake is the one who did a huge amount of this archaeological research. She assumes that during this pre-Sargon era, the cult of Inanna was rather limited. But again, how could you be limited if she had all the powers that no one else had? And so it goes. So
well, I could see Inanna being a form of as the names go, you know.
Well, yeah, here is Inanna Temple, House of Heaven, okay, and the city of An, and so forth. So,
right.
So it goes. So in the old Akkadian period, Inanna merged with Ishtar, is what people think. And there was a Inanna of the Umas alongside Inanna of Uruk and of Zabalam, and the worship of Ishtar and the syncretism between her and Inanna was encouraged by Sargon. As a result, she quickly became one of the most venerated deities in Mesopotamia pantheon, and was invoked all over the place. In Old Babylon, she had the many cult centers, and then in later times, her cult in Uruk continued to flourish. Ishtar became particularly worshipped in the upper Mesopotamian kingdom of Assyria, and especially in Nineveh, Ashur, Arbela, etc. So she was a big deal. The Sumerians worshipped Inanna as the goddess of both warfare and love. So go figure that one out. Unlike other gods whose role were static and whose domains were limited, Inanna was moving from conquest to conquest, portrayed as young, impetuous, constantly striving for more power than had been allotted to her. While she was worshipped as the goddess of love, she was not the goddess of marriage, nor was she ever viewed as a mother goddess. According to all mythology, Ishtar was not temperamentally disposed toward such functions. In fact, Inanna was significant specifically because she was not a mother goddess. As a love goddess, she was invoked by the Mesopotamians in all kinds of incantations. So in Inanna's descent to the underworld, Inanna treats her lover, Dumuzid, in a very capricious manner. This aspect of Inanna's personality is emphasized in the later Akkadian version of the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Gilgamesh points out Ishtar's infamous ill treatment of her lovers. However, the portrayal of Inanna's relations, according to this person, the portrayal of Inanna's relationship with Dumuzid in the descent myth is unusual, I would say. Yeah. Then she was worshipped as a war deity. There were hymns devoted to her. Battle that was occasionally referred to as the dance of Inanna. Epitaphs related to lions were meant to highlight this aspect of her character as a war goddess. She was referred to with the name Inanna, meaning victory, but this could apply to other deities as well. And another epitaph highlighting this was Anu Intu, the martial one. So you can see that she's got all the bases covered here in terms of war. The Assyrian royal curse formulas invoke both Ishtar's primary functions at once, invoking her to remove potency and martial valor at the same time. So pretty bad news getting cursed this way. And Mesopotamian texts indicate that traits perceived as heroic, such as the king's ability to lead troops and triumph over enemies, and sexual prowess, regarded as interconnected. Whatever it was, Genghis Khan was when he was leading the what was it called, the Great Horde across the Russian steppes and going into Eastern Europe, that he had 2 or 3 concubines a night, and that they've done enough DNA sequencing that it appears that there's 10 million people on Earth now that are related to Genghis Khan as a result, combination of sexual prowess and leading troops in battle. So while Inanna and Ishtar was a goddess, her gender could be ambiguous. This was a characteristic not just of Ishtar, but of a category of deities he refers to as Ishtar-type goddesses, of which there's a bunch. And there was a late hymn phrase, she, Ishtar, is Enlil, she is Ninil. So Enlil is, I believe, the male, and Ninil is the female. So this is a reference to a dimorphic character of Ishtar. And it also is a way to exalt people to do things. You're Enlil and Ninil. And there's a hymn to the male aspect of Ishtar. So, you know, there's a lot of confusion of sexes here.
Well, there were people and are people that are really like that. So
yeah,
it
absolutely.
was important to have a goddess
that can switch.
reflect that.
Yeah, I agree. Inanna's twin brother was the god of sun and justice, and in Sumerian texts, they're depicted as extremely close. Their relationship might have been incestuous. The myth of her descent into the underworld, she addresses Ereshkigal, the queen of the underworld, as her older sister, yet 2 goddesses almost never appear together elsewhere in Sumerian literature and were not placed in the same category in god lists. So in some Neo-Assyrian sources, Ishtar is also associated with Adad and mirroring the relationship between Shashuska and her brother Teshub in Hurrian mythology. So the most common tradition regarding Nana and his wife Ningal as her parents. Examples of it are present in the early dynastic period and so forth. And the net of it is that people don't really know, they're grasping at these things. Dumuzid, the god of shepherds, is described as Inanna's husband, but some interpretations say Inanna's loyalty to him is questionable when she abandons him in her descent into the underworld and permits the demons to drag him down into the underworld as her replacement. There's a different myth, the return of Dumuzid. Inanna instead mourns over Dumuzid's death and ultimately decrees he'll be allowed to return to heaven to be with her for half of the year. And then we have another archaeologist noting that this is unusual. How do you make sense out of this? And there's a lot of love poetry describing encounters between Inanna and Dumuzi and so forth. So there's a whole family here associated with Inanna, but one thing that comes through is Inanna apparently doesn't have any kids. The syncretism and all these other deities here, we've talked about Inanna and Ishtar being conflated, but it goes on and on. The oldest known hymn is dedicated to Inanna. Okay, so that's pretty mind-boggling that this is the 4,000 years ago. I have no idea why they think this hymn is something you could sing. Many god lists were compiled by ancient scribes containing an entire Inanna group, enumerating similar goddesses. And the whole tablet number 4 of this list, so there's 7 tablets total. So one whole tablet is just known as the Ishtar tablet because of all the names of Ishtar's equivalents, her titles and various attendants, and it goes on and on. So there's lots and lots of goddesses that are tied into Inanna and Ishtar. And in the later period, Ishtar's name was sometimes used as a generic term for goddess, while writing of Inanna was used to spell the title Beltu, leading to further conflations between goddess and so forth. And a possible example of this, it means the goddess Manzat, but they wrote it as Manzat Ishtar. So you can see that Ishtar is the same as being a goddess, which is what they picked up. Now, there's the thing that to me was interesting was these origin myths. The poem Enki and the World Order begins by describing the god Enki and his establishment of the cosmic organization of the universe. And toward the end of the poem, Inanna comes to Enki and complains that he has assigned a domain and special powers to all the other gods except for her. And she declares she's been treated unfairly, and Enki responds by telling her that she already has a domain and he does not need to assign her one. The myth of Inanna and the Hulupu tree, found in the preamble to the epic of Gilgamesh in Enkidu and the Netherworld, centers around a young Inanna, not yet stable in her power. It begins with a Hulupu tree, which Kramer, one of these archaeologists, identifies as possibly a willow growing on the banks of the Euphrates Inanna moves the tree to her garden in Uruk with the intention to carve it into a throne once it is fully grown. The tree grows and matures, but the serpent, who knows no charm, the Anzu bird and Lily too, seen by some as the Sumerian forerunner to Lilith of Jewish folklore, all take up residence within the tree, causing Inanna to cry with sorrow. The hero Gilgamesh in this story is portrayed as her brother, comes along and slays the serpent, causing the Anzu bird and Lily to flee. Gilgamesh's companions chop down the tree, carve its wood into a bed and a throne, which they give to Inanna, who fashions a piku and a miku. Probably, let's see what this says here. Hold on a second. A drum and drumsticks, respectively, although the exact identifications are uncertain, which he gives to Gilgamesh as a reward for his heroism. Okay. So in the Epic of Gilgamesh, Ishtar appears to Gilgamesh after he and his companion Enkidu have returned to Uruk, having defeated the ogre Humbaba, and demands that Gilgamesh become her consort. Gilgamesh refuses her, pointing out that all of her previous lovers have suffered. You know, there's nothing worse than scorning this sort of woman. So infuriated by Gilgamesh's refusal, Ishtar goes to heaven and tells her father Anu that Gilgamesh has insulted her. Anu asks her why she's complaining to him. Why didn't she go confront Gilgamesh herself? Ishtar demands that Anu give her the bull of heaven and swears that if he does not give it to her, she'll break in the doors of hell and smash the bolts, and there'll be confusion, mixing people, those that are in heaven and those are from the lower depths. And I shall bring up the dead to eat food like the living, and the host of the dead will outnumber the living. So pretty tough. So what happens? Anu gives Ishtar the bull of heaven. Ishtar sends it to attack Gilgamesh and Enkidu. Gilgamesh and Enkidu kill the bull and offer its heart to the sun god Shamash. While Gilgamesh and Enkidu are resting, Ishtar stands by on the walls of Uruk and curses Gilgamesh. Enkidu tears off the bull's right thigh, throws it in Ishtar's face, saying, "If I could lay my hands on you, it is this I should do to you, and lash your entrails to your side." Enkidu later dies for this impiety, so he should have kept his mouth shut. But anyway, Ishtar calls them together, the crimped courtesans, prostitutes, and the harlots, and orders them to mourn for the bull of heaven. Meanwhile, Gilgamesh holds a celebration over the bull of heaven's defeat. Later in the epic, Utnapishtim tells Gilgamesh the story of the great flood, which was sent by the god Enlil to annihilate all life on earth, because the humans, who were vastly overpopulated, made too much noise and prevented him from sleeping.
This
Actually,
sounds extremely like the Taurus cycle
yeah,
from what was the book by the pair written at MIT?
the Hamlet's Mill.
Hamlet's Mill, yeah.
Yeah,
I'm talking about Taurus,
yeah.
the age of Taurus, which
Yeah.
had to do with the age of the pyramids.
I just remembered I asked Ron Cohen about the flood, and he said he just barely made it through it. He was holding on to the top of some mountain, and the waters were everywhere. So anyway, let me get this out of the way. Ishtar wept and mourned over the destruction of humanity alongside the Anunnaki, After the flood subside, Utnapishtim makes an offering to the gods, and Ishtar appears to Utnapishtim wearing a lapi lazuli necklace with beads shaped like flies. Tells him that Enlil never discussed the flood with any of the other gods. She swears him that she'll never allow Enlil to cause another flood, and carries her lapis lazuli necklace, a sign of her oath. Ishtar invites all the gods, except for Enlil, to gather around the offering and enjoy. So here we have, going back to Gilgamesh and the flood, that Ishtar and Inanna are running around there. So Inanna has become an important figure in modern feminist theory because she appears in this male-dominated Sumerian pantheon, but is as powerful, or not, if not more powerful, than the male deities that she appears beside. Simone de Beauvoir, in her book The Second Sex, 1949, argues that Inanna, along with the other powerful female deities from antiquity, have been marginalized by modern culture in favor of male deities. So Inanna was viewed as a marginal figure by males in the Sumerian religion because she embodied socially unacceptable archetype. She was not domesticated and she was not married to anyone. And there you have it. That's unacceptable for men. You have to be in the house, taking care of things, and doing what with your husband. And then, but this has been argued against because of Inanna's being so central to the Sumerian religion and the powers. So there's no way that she could be marginal. So a lot of this is men saying that she's marginal. There's another one who specialized in the study of the position of women in antiquity and highlights problems with the focus on fertility, the small selection of the sources that her works relied on, and her view that position of goddesses in the pantheon reflected that of ordinary women in society, and so forth. But Inanna is also an important figure in BDSM culture. The portrayal of Inanna in the Inanna and Ebe myth is cited as a precursor example of the dominatrix archetype, characterizing her as a powerful woman who forces gods and men to submit to her. In mythology, Inanna's submissives danced in rituals while being whipped by her to satisfy her. When the submissives asked for mercy, Inanna ended the flagellation, making such an action the pioneer of BDSM safe word concepts. So there you go. They're covering all the bases. Inanna really does it all. So there you go. There's our first one.
Any questions?
Just to show you what happened. Now we'll go. We didn't what we had put together before, just to show you, how things have changed. So let me see. Oh wait, I've still got this one here. What happened here? Oh, I think this is, I think the problem is, oh yeah, this is not PowerPoint, this is Acrobat. So let me see, what can I do to, does this work? No. Hold on. Let me go back and get it up again.
This doesn't seem like salmon. Is it some other fish?
No, it's salmon. It's sockeye. I'm just trying to get these other things out of the way. Okay. So here we are. Here we go. That got rid of that finally. Now, how do I get the full screen here? Here we go. It takes a while. So here are some of these information sources from what we used before. And we started with when God had a wife. So the precession of the equinoxes, every 2,160 years, there's a new North Star as the North Pole precesses about its axis. So in Julius Caesar, the title character is, but I am constant as a North Star, of whose true fixed and resting quality there is no fellow in the firmament. And this is Shakespeare's way of saying this guy is a flaky, unstable chap, because the North Star is not fixed. Even Shakespeare knew it. The age of Leo, which was 11,000 BC to 8,800 BC, Leo comes out of the age of Virgo. The sun rules Leo, and this leads to the idea of the virgin birth of the sun. The male is dominant, and at the same time, this is the epoch when Göbekli Tepe was created in Turkey. We have the age of Cancer following the age of Leo, 8,800 BC to 6,700 BC. So the moon rules Cancer, the moon rules the mother and the family, the feminine is dominant, agriculture starts, and the flood occurs. It's when people believe there was a flood. The age of Gemini, from 6,700 BC to 4,500 BC, Mercury rules Gemini, which rules thinking and communication. The male is dominant, and this is the age of written language or cuneiform and mathematics. For example, it was clear that the Sumerians understood the Pythagorean theorem, even though Pythagoras wasn't even born for 4,000 years. Okay, so now the Torah tells of El, the god that was worshipped along with his wife Asherah and many other deities such as Baal. Well, El had 700 wives and 300 concubines. El blessed 70 different tribes of man that scattered all over earth, one of which was the Hebrew tribe led by Yahweh. The Hebrew tribe had several factions, one led by Ephraim, the second led by Judah, and the group led by Ephraim was dominant. So the group led by Judah overtook and became dominant, which is why they're called Jews, because they're Judah. And Moses was told by Yahweh to worship only Yahweh. This is because the Hebrew tribe worshiped Baal and Asheroth and other deities. Asheroth was symbolized as a tree, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And the Torah does not reflect the role of Asherah. Okay, so here we have women, remember, this is the wife of El, which was the god that was being worshipped. And she's the one who is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And so it goes. Right at the start, they've taken the Torah and written women out of it. So this suggests that there was an earlier form of Hebrew worship with both male and female gods. In fact, there was a discovery made in the previous century of a Hebrew temple dedicated both to Yahweh and to the warrior goddess Anat. And the Hebrew pantheon of goddesses included Yahweh's wife, Asherah, the goddess of fertility and childbirth, which is again closely related to Inanna. She was involved with all of this. So this shows how both Jesus and his great rival, Simon Magus, were attempting to restore the ancient goddess worship and religions of the Israelites. And of course, they didn't want to hear this. We have Göbekli Tepe, which is, again, it's dated to at least the 9500 BC. And the only way that I put this in perspective is I take a look at when Göbekli Tepe was built to when the pyramids were built. And then I look at when the pyramids were built to today. And the age from Göbekli Tepe being built to when the pyramids were built is greater than from the pyramids to today, which shows you how much history we've missed out on. There's a large number of these circular structures called megaliths, and they're adorned with all kinds of abstract details, clothing, reliefs, wild animals, you name it, it's there. And they've just barely made a dent in excavating this place. It's gigantic. But this suggests they're looking here to see what about the role of women in all of this. So the prehistorians, that's what I love. This is called prehistory because it's before history, which of course is like a joke because we're talking about it. It's 10,000 BC. But anyway, this is leading into the advent of agriculture, but there's a disagreement on whether farming caused people to settle down or vice versa. That is, you farmed, and because you farmed, you got food, so why run around scavenging and hunting? Or is it that you were hunting and you decided to farm to have a backup and to hunting, and the farming worked out really well, so let's settle down into villages. So Göbekli Tepe is far from any known sources of water. There's no clear evidence of any agricultural cultivation. It apparently was just a site as a temple where there was some sort of spiritual celebration that took place. There were few or no permanent inhabitants. The only evidence they can find is some pits there with a lot of bones from animals that have been cooked in fires to feed all these people. So now when we go forward from this into the age of Taurus, 4500 BC to 2300 BC, the sun is now in the sign of Taurus at the spring equinox, and the feminine is dominant. The Hebrews are enslaved in Egypt, worship multiple gods and goddesses, including, for example, Asheroth, who we saw earlier, and so forth. The Druids in Ireland and Stonehenge in England, the age of pyramid building, are all happening here in this age of Taurus. Then we go into the age of Aries, 2300 BC to 150 BC, where the masculine is dominant. Moses leads the Hebrews out of Egypt, and the Hebrews worship one God and are the chosen people through the first covenant, into the age of Pisces, which went from 150 BC to 2010, where the feminine is dominant, and the new Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth, is acting as the de facto avatar of the age of Pisces.
That's the term I use.
And he ends the first covenant, where the Jews are the ones that are chosen, and declares a second covenant, which covers for all people. And we now move into our age, the age of Aquarius, 2010 on up to 4200, where the masculine is dominant, but this time the emphasis is on compassion, equality, liberty, individuality, democracy, brotherly love. And these are all precursors of the American and French Revolution.
Okay.
So what we end up with here, let's go back to review the age of Taurus. This is when the pyramids were put in. This is when we had Inanna. This is the urban life in Mesopotamia. Uruk became the most urbanized city in the world, having over 50,000 inhabitants. And the walled cities of the Indus Valley were starting to be built. And there were also creation myths, the myth of Osiris, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and so forth, and the beginning of the Bronze Age, with writing occurring, cuneiform, Egyptian hieroglyphics, and Cretan and Minoan hieroglyphs, as well as what was happening in India. And so just to confuse things, we end up with a different religion, Manichaeism, that we're following Mana as the final prophet after Zoroaster, Gautama Buddha, and Jesus, which just showed up here. They were in the 3rd century AD. They had a burst, and then Christianity wiped it out. But while it was there, it was the main rival to Christianity in the Roman Empire before Islam showed up. And this also led to Mithraism here, which was a rivalry that Christianity wiped out. And so here we end up with these different symbols that, you want to talk about any of these? We have this symbol here from the Celtic Book of Kells with the 4 Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And
the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac. It's
right,
Taurus on the bottom,
is the bull.
right? And then to the left is Leo, as a lion.
Mm-hmm.
Angel is Aquarius.
Aquarius.
And to the right is Scorpio. And it's kind of esoteric symbol of an eagle,
Right.
which people think is code for Phoenix.
Right. I'm just going to skip through this because I think there's. Oh, yeah, this was important. Despite what Jews and Christians believe, the ancient Israelites venerated several deities besides Yahweh, including Yahweh's wife, was worshipped openly in the temple in Jerusalem. This is what gets ignored in these things, is that women were there from the get-go. And so the history was rewritten to make it appear that it was really Yahweh alone. And the worship of Asherah and other goddesses became heresy.
Well, I mean, the idea of a trinity, what, no mother at all?
Right. So how did this shift from matriarchy to patriarchy come about? It was really early on. Women bought and sold property, traded in the marketplace, and inherited title and land from their mothers. And so there's you've got to view it as a conspiracy where they were just written out of it.
Well, they weren't always all hearts and flowers and
No, Inanna was,
kind and, sweet and generous. They could be extremely ruthless and destructive. So the pendulum has kept swinging back and forth, back and forth.
Yeah.
It's not one
no, Inanna was,
gender's fault at all.
Right.
It's not. And now it's, kind of au courant to blame the men for the patriarchy. That was a reaction against the devouring mother goddess.
right.
She kind of was depicted as devouring her children.
Right. Yeah, and there's undoubtedly a lot of truth to that. The other thing that happened was they discovered in 1896 this Gospel of Mary of Magdalene, and it showed that Mary was in fact a close companion of Jesus of Nazareth and was taught truths that the Gospels, the apostles, were not capable of handling, which was a surprise to Peter. And this reveals a radical love that sits at the heart of the story of Christianity. We're not to feel ashamed or unworthy for being human. We're not sinful. In fact, our purpose is to be fully human, a true human being, someone who's remembered that, yes, we have a messy, limited ego, but we have a limitless soul. We need to turn inward to meditate so that we can see past the ego of our own lives to what's more real and lasting and infinite and already here within. So here you see, very much of a Buddhist message coming through. And that takes us over to character Pistis Sophia. This was discovered maybe in 1773, but it was actually written in 300, 400 AD. And the existing manuscript relates the teachings of the transfigured Jesus to the assembled disciples, including his mother Mary, Mary Magdalene, and Martha. So in this context, transfigured refers to Jesus after his death and resurrection, not the event during his life where he spoke of appearances of Moses and Elijah on the mountain. So in this text, the risen Jesus has spent 11 years speaking with his disciples, teaching them only the lower mysteries. And after 11 years, he receives his true garment, is able to reveal the higher mysteries revered by this group. And the prized mysteries relate to complex cosmologies and the knowledge necessary for the soul to reach the highest realms. So much of this material that's here outlines the myth of the fall and restoration, this figure known as Pistis Sophia, and giving parallels between her prayers of repentance and particular psalms and odes of Solomon. So I remember reading this, and it's made up again and again of her taking, making penance for this thing, for that thing, the other thing that she did. And at the end of the day, she really is a major female divinity, but she seems to dwell outside of the divine realm, and her fall and redemption parallel that of other myths that are here. But of course, this is not taught anywhere.
Go back up.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to have this one on the screen for a few moments.
Well, the fact that Jesus of Nazareth spent 11 years with this, shows this is not a minor thing, because he only had recruited these apostles in 3 years till he was crucified. So he had much more to teach them. Then we come to Hildegard of Bingen, and she was in charge of an abbey on the Rhine River. But all of a sudden, at age 40, started having these seizures where she started to compose music. And in fact, it appears, if you look on YouTube, that she has written by far the greatest amount of medieval music of anybody. And there's just wave after wave of people that pick up the music and redo it in different ways, and we enjoy listening to it. It's a very unusual. You have to understand she's doing this before there's really any notion of having a staff and having bars of music and the musical notation that goes with it. She did all this just in a vision. She had vision after vision of this music, and she wrote something down, and somehow people have transcribed this, but the notation is not modern music by any stretch of the imagination. So very interesting chants.
They're very modern sounding. They're just,
Yeah.
The keys are very different.
So she took over this one monastery in 1136. I think it was 1140 she started to get these visions. And then she founded 2 more monasteries. And while she's running all 3 monasteries, she continues to have these visions and writes theology, botany, and medicinal works, as well as hymns and all kinds of antiphons for the liturgy, plus poems, and supervised the illumination manuscripts of these. So there are more surviving chants by Hildegard than by any other composer from the entire Middle Ages. And she's written both the music and the words. A lot of these things, they're just these chants. So they're just going la, but there's others that actually have words to them in Latin. She constructed a language that she used as well.
To me, they're a lot like Rumi's text.
Yeah.
You know, there's this kind of rapture, this passion with the divine. And to me, that's really like the mark of a true mystic, is that there's this passionate rapture. The closest thing that we associate with it is the troubadours and their romantic love, which you could also say was spiritual love. And that the woman that they were, kind of deifying was bringing out the best in them.
Right. So Hildegard actually started having these visions at age 3. And at age 5, she began to realize she was actually having visions. She used the term visio, which is Latin for vision, to describe this feature of her experience. and she recognized it was a gift she couldn't explain to others. And she saw all these things in the light of God through the five senses, but she was hesitant to share her visions, confiding only in her nanny, who then told the tutor. But then she continued to have these visions. She took over this monastery in 1136, and in 1141 received a vision that she believed was to write down that which you see and hear. She was still hesitant to record her visions. She became physically ill, and the illustrations in her book, Scivias, were visions that Hildegard experienced, causing her great suffering and tribulations. And although I saw and heard these things, I refused to write for a long time, though doubt and bad opinion and the diversity of human words, not with stubbornness, but in the exercise of humility, until laid low by the scourge of God, I fell upon a bed of sickness, and then
Well, we can't take.
yeah, can't.
You call back, they're busy with a class.
Yeah, and until laid low by the scourge of God, I fell upon a bed of sickness, compelled at last by many illnesses and the witness of a certain noble maiden of good conduct, and of that of a man I secretly sought and found. I set my hand to writing. While I was doing this, I sensed, as I mentioned above, the deep profundity of the scriptural exposition, and I raised myself from illness by the strength I received and brought this work to a close, though just barely, in 10 years. So it took her 10 years to write this book, Scivias. I didn't do this by any invention of my heart, but as the secret mysteries of God that I heard and received them in the heavenly places. And I heard a voice from heaven telling me, cry out, therefore, and write thus. So she's going into these visions, almost seizures, and whatever is going on, she starts writing these things down. And it continues for the rest of her life. She had the umbra viventis lucis, the reflection of the living light. So umbra would be the shadow or reflection, and viventis is living and lucis is light. She wrote a letter at age 77 describing her experience with this light. From my earliest childhood, before my bones, nerves, and veins are fully strengthened, I've always seen this vision in my soul, even to the present time, when I am more than 70 years old. In this vision, my soul, as God would have it, rises up high into the vault of heaven, into the changing sky, and spreads itself out among different peoples, though they're far away from me in distant lands and places. And because I see them this way in my soul, I observe them in accord with the shifting of clouds and other created things. I don't hear them with my outward ears. I don't perceive them by the thoughts of my own heart or any combination of my five senses, but in my soul alone, while my outward eyes are open. So I've never fallen prey to ecstasy in the visions, but I see them wide awake day and night, constantly fettered by sickness, and often in the grip of pain so intense it threatens to kill me. But God has sustained me until now, and the light that I see is not spatial, but is far brighter than a cloud which carries the sun. I can measure neither the height nor length nor breadth in it, and I call it the reflection of the living light. And as the sun, the moon, and the stars appear in water, so writing sermons, virtues, and certain human actions take form for me and gleam. So I'm not aware of other mystics. I'm sure there are that had similar experiences, but again, she started doing this when she was age 3. She was just caught up in this, and she just got stronger and stronger and better at doing it. So the book that she wrote has 3 parts. The first part is the order of God's creation, the creation and fall of Adam and Eve, structure of the universe, which she described as the shape of an egg, the relationship between the body and the soul, God's relationship to his people, and the choirs of angels. The second part describes the order of redemption, the coming of Christ the Redeemer, the Trinity, the church as the bride of Christ and the mother of the faithful in baptism and confirmation, the orders of the church, Christ's sacrifice on the cross, and the Eucharist and the fight against the devil. And then the third part recapitulates the history of salvation told in the first two parts, symbolizes a building adorned with allegorical figures and virtues, and concludes with the Symphony of Heaven, which is an early version of one of her musical compositions. Then she went off and wrote Veritas. Yeah, do you want to talk about this? This is greenness, Veritas.
It's one of her main concepts. It's a kind of quickening that she sees happening in plants, through photosynthesis and energy flowing through the veins, of the plants and delivering the oxygen to the cells and so on. She had an extremely intricate scientific view of it, but it's also incredibly spiritual and mystical. It's how she sees the energy from the divine taking form and emanating and growing through vegetation, which her words and music and even her illustration, she did beautiful. There's one in the upper right hand corner.
Yeah, this is out of Veritas up here. This is one of her. She supervised it, but it was her said, "I see this. This is my vision of this. What's going on."
But
The thing that's amazing here is that if you just like the plants can prosper, you as a human being can grow and heal yourself
right.
if you are of the proper inclination, so that in fact you should never be sick.
And she sees it as like the spirit's response, like the plant's response to photosynthesis, to light. She sees us responding to spiritual light with the same kind of quickening and liveliness. She sees it as life force.
Yeah, so it's like healing is like a gardener who removes and nourishes plants, but in a sanctuary of some sort. And it's interesting because she lived to a ripe old age. She was like 80 when she died.
And she wrote, what is it called? Like encyclopedic texts about herbs and different healing
Right.
properties of different plants and
Yeah, she
minerals.
studied a lot of plants, and in the three abbeys that she was running, there were all kinds of plants growing there, in part for food, but in part, she's experimenting what works better to help these things along.
Yeah,
So it's a metaphor for spiritual and physical health.
and healing and medicine.
And
And she sees everything in terms of this kind of quickening. I wish I could evoke it, half as well as she does, but
it's freshness, vitality, fertility, fecundity, fruitfulness, growth, verdure. So
verdure is probably the best word, but it's that's so much more passive sounding. What she's talking about is this reactivity
Right.
to the light that's really animated, literally.
Yeah.
And
And the Marjorie was trained. There's a San Francisco labyrinth organization, which took the name Veritas. So this is when you walk the labyrinth. Hopefully, this would evoke healing yourself, spiritual and physical.
I get this photosynthesis happening, this light sensitivity happening.
Yeah.
And the woman who founded this, we should have a little thing about her, Lorna Artress, is the woman who uncovered the labyrinth at Chartres. It was always covered with chairs before she started going there and clearing it off. And now she leads a lot of pilgrimages, you know, people going there to do workshops and
Yeah.
experience it. But she's I forget what is she's Episcopal, but there's a cathedral, Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. She's the canon of it, for the labyrinth.
Got it. Here's a different example of someone out of the medieval ages, Catherine of Siena, who convinced Pope Gregory to return the papacy to Rome. They moved it to Avignon, which there were two popes, one in Rome and one in Avignon. Go figure. And Jesus appeared to her with a heart in his hand and said, "As I took your heart away from you the other day, now I see you giving you mine, so you can go on living with it forever." So this convinced the Pope that it was crazy to have two popes. And so it goes. A different one is Joan of Arc, a peasant who ended up with these visions and approached the crown prince, Charles of Valois, to allow her to lead the country's army in Orleans. And it defeated the English and their French allies, the Burgundians. I was have to remember that the French were actually in the south and the English were in the north. Or no, the other way around. I got it wrong. The French were in the north and the English and their allies were in the south. Because you always would think, well, the English must have come across the channel, but they'd already come across the channel and they're in France taking over everything. The German poet Goethe wrote a small book, The Maid of Orleans, all about Joan of Arc and these visions that she had. And eventually she was captured by the English, tried for heresy and burned at the stake at age 19. So that's very prominent woman. There was Teresa of Avila in the 16th century Spain. She just focused on prayer and went on. She had a young nephew who was in poor health. He was crushed by a fallen wall, and her prayer cured him, which led to her being canonized as a saint. And so it goes. Point is that there's no shortage of women that are doing amazing things that have been ignored by the men. So
and they weren't just fighting battles.
no. Claire of Assisi had a very wealthy family. She joined the Order of Francis of Assisi, and when she was take her parents promised her in marriage to a wealthy man in 1211. She ran for it and was taken in by Francis of Assisi, and he played. He ended up with giving her a chance. Her piety was so profound that her sister, mother, and several other female relatives came to live with her and to be her disciples in her convent outside of Assisi. So these were all called the Poor Clares. They walked barefoot, slept on the ground, abstained from meat, spoke only when necessary, and so forth. There was an English mystic. This one, very little is known, but she became ill and nearly died. A priest came to her bedside, showed her an image of Christ, and she recovered and received 16 revelations. God later revealed to her the meaning of these visions, and so it goes. And she ended up living her life out that way. There was a Franciscan mystic. There was a huge earthquake in 1279. There was a war against Perugia, which led her to call upon St. Francis, who appeared to her in a vision and instructed her to go to confession. Her mother, her husband, and all of her children died in a span of a few months. 3 years later, she sold all her possessions, enrolled in the Order of St. Francis, had a vision of God's love, and dictated this in a book of experience of the truly faithful. Mechtild of Magdeburg was part of the community that authored a text called The Flowing Light of the Godhead, and spent her life in a convent.
I wonder how many of them were epileptic.
Yeah, you don't know. They would confuse having these seizures with having these visions. How would you tell them apart? Here is Hadowich, the Flemish mystic, who was part of a network of ascetic and philanthropic communities of women in the Netherlands in the 13th century. But you know, the list just goes on and on of just women. And then of course we have the Cathars. That I think we've covered this in another class, but they were in southern France here. Over here is Nice, and Marseille is about here. So this is Carcassonne is over here in southern France, and they were flourishing, and unfortunately for them, they were making a lot of money, and the church was broke, and the King of France was broke, so they, of course, went after them to get the money. But the Cathars regarded men and women as equals, and
Which was generous.
yeah, and the Cathar beliefs, some believe came from Manichaeism, but they may have come from this sect in Bulgaria known as the Bogomils. No one knows. There are those that believe that it came actually from Mary Magdalene when she went to the south of France there. But again, no one knows what's going on here. The Cathars believe Satan had tricked the angels into falling from heaven. And so there was a strict, the purpose of life was to renounce all these pleasures and enticements of the world. And through repeated incarnation, make one's way back to heaven, which sounds familiar. And notice they have the idea of carnation, incarnation occurring. There are the hierarchy is the perfecti, those who would renounce the world, which become priests and bishops. And again, these are men and women. The credentants, the believers who still interacted with the world but worked toward renunciation of it, and then the sympathizers, who were the non-believers, but they aided and supported the Cathars. So they rejected the teaching of the Catholic Church as immoral, which of course earned them the hatred of the church, and criticized the church heavily for its hypocrisy, greed, and the lechery of its clergy, and the church's acquisition of land and wealth. And I think in this time period, over 1/3 of Europe was owned by the church, the land. It was by far the and that just the land. That has nothing to do with the money that they had also.
The gold candlesticks.
Sure.
Well, it's still true. The
Yeah.
church owns more property than anybody else.
So what happened was the first crusade was declared by the Pope. Their main town was Albigense, so it was called the Albigensian Crusade. They also created the Inquisition, and that went in after the crusade, after they'd had these battles and cleaned out everybody else. The problem with this is that anything that's known about the Cathars comes from the victors, and these are Catholic clergy who are involved, like with the Inquisition. So it's very hard to figure out what really happened here, because whatever the Cathars wrote was destroyed. I'm trying to see here. Just skip over this.
Oh, I think that's all really interesting.
The main thing was the feminine principle in the divine, that God was both male and female. The female aspect of God was Sophia, or wisdom, and this belief encouraged equality of the sexes. And then there was reincarnation, that the soul would be continually reborn until it renounced the world completely and escaped incarnation. And cosmic duality, the existence of two powerful deities in the universe, one good and one evil, were in a constant state of war. The purpose of life was to serve good by serving others and escape from the cycle of birth and death to return to God. So quite different than Christianity. They were vegetarians, but they did allow eating of fish for the credentes and the sympathizers. They believed in celibacy for the perfecti, and it was encouraged in general, because it was thought that every person born was just another poor soul trapped by the devil in a body, and marriage overall was discouraged. The dignity of manual labor, the Cathars all worked, priests as well as lay people, many as weavers. And then suicide was actually a rational and dignified response under certain conditions. So again, very, very different than this Christianity. The only books they accepted were the Gospels. They rejected all the epistles of Paul, and they had a special emphasis on the Gospel according to John. Their central religious text was the Book of Two Principles, passages of which would be read by one of the perfecti to a congregation and then interpreted for them by another member of the group. And typically these readers, the perfecti, would be women. The Book of Two Principles related, among other aspects of faith, the dualist nature of life, how humans, once divine spirits of life, came to be bound in corruptible mortal flesh. So, you can see elements of Buddhism in this if you stare at it. The Book of Two Principles, the devil came to the gates of heaven, requested entry and was denied, waited outside the gate for 1,000 years, watching for a chance to slip in. One day he did it. Once inside, he gathered an audience of divine spirits, told them they were losing out by continuing to love and serve God, and they never gave them anything. God owned everything. So just follow him and leave heaven, and he'd make them all kinds of pleasure, wonderful vineyards, rich fields, beautiful women, handsome men, wonderful riches, the best wine. So many souls were seduced by this, and for 9 days and 9 nights they fell through the hole in heaven the devil had created. God allowed this for those who wished to leave, but other souls were falling through the holes just by mistake, so God sealed the hole. After the souls had fallen, they found themselves in the devil's realm without any of the good things he had promised. And remembering the joys of heaven, they repented and asked the devil if they could return. The devil replied they could not return because he'd fashioned for them bodies which would bind them to earth and cause them to forget about heaven. So the devil made the bodies easily enough, but could not manage to attach the souls to them so they would think, feel, and move. So the devil asked God for help. God understood that the souls who had fallen would have to work their way back to his grace. They could do so by struggling with these bodies, so he made a deal with the devil. The devil could do as he liked with the bodies, but the souls which animated them belonged to God. The devil consented, and the humans were created. So trapped in these bodies, the souls would live, die, and be reborn in another, as long as that soul remained attached to the body and the pleasures which the devil had promised it back in heaven. Once the soul renounced the body and all its temptations, it would be free to return to God and resume its former state. So the whole purpose of human existence was the struggle against the devil and the prison of flesh. And as you can imagine, this view contrasted sharply with the Catholic Church vision of the Garden of Eden, in which woman, in the form of Eve, caused humanity's fall by seducing Adam into eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and humanity's later redemption from sin through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, the Son of a single, all-powerful male God. Suicide was and is still considered a serious sin by the Church. Marriage isn't concerned. Reincarnation is rejected, as is any concept of duality. While in Catholicism, God and the devil are two eternal, uncreated forces of equal power. In Christianity, the devil is a fallen angel created by God and ultimately subordinate to him. And in addition to these differences, there was the Cathar insistence that Jesus had never been born of a woman and had been made flesh, never suffered, died, and therefore never resurrected. So all of these events, as told in the gospel narratives, happened ideally as a sort of allegory for the state of the soul, which is born into the world trapped in a body, must suffer and die, and finally be free only after it's mastered the body and renounced the things of this world. So the Cathars repudiate the symbol of the cross, and any literal reading of these biblical books. They believe that the cross should be destroyed, which you could imagine what that did, and that the cross was nothing more than a symbol of worldly power, and the sacraments of the Church were likewise rejected. So the Cathars who were not celibate practiced birth control and abortion, believing sex was a natural aspect of the human condition, could be engaged in for pleasure, not only for procreation. In fact, procreation was discouraged. Women were valued as men's equals. Female figures from the Bible were highlighted, especially Mary Magdalene and the Virgin Mary. And some scholars have suggested, in fact, the growth of the cult of the Virgin Mary in medieval Europe was encouraged by the Cathars' elevation of womanhood. And so it goes. So the Cathars started off with communities of size 60 to 600 individuals. They shared their possessions. So see, there's no ownership of property, and everybody was really in one big family. Everybody took care of everybody else. and this was very appealing to people. Of course, it wasn't appealing to the church. They dressed simply in dark robes with hoods and hats, went barefoot. Men were unshaven with long beards, and they show up in records all over the place. Let's see. So to become a Cathar, one simply professed one's belief, and they received the blessing and the welcoming to the faith through the laying on of hands, and then they would go through steps to become perfecti, and to become the very top of the heap. And so the end result of this was that outside of the region where they were strong in southern France, they had to be careful and hide their faith, and this gave rise to the poetry of courtly love, which developed in southern France. And the damsel in distress must be rescued. The French poet Chrétien de Troyes, whose patroness was Marie de Champagne. So there are famous elements of the legend of King Arthur, Lancelot's affair with Queen Guinevere, the quest for the Holy Grail. All of this comes out of what the Chrétien was dealing with, and he was the first to call Arthur's court Camelot. Not too shabby. These poems involve a quest or a struggle to find and rescue a lady who's been abducted or imprisoned. Women played important roles in these stories, and our central characters are served by men rather than minor figures and just men's property. And the poems celebrated romantic love, which is considered quite different from and far superior to marriage, because in marriage, the couple had no choice. The match was arranged by the parents, while one chose to engage in extramarital or premarital affairs, love affairs. And so in modern day, these themes seem to be commonplace and far from surprising. But if you go to 12th century Provence, you'll realize this is like incredibly a startling departure from this, and that it spread widely and quickly through the troubadours who traveled throughout France performing these works. Then the crusade ended up.
I just want to say, I agree with Lauren Artress that a lot of incredible beauty and wisdom was lost with the so-called Middle Ages or the Dark Ages, with the late Age of Enlightenment. It wasn't.
Yeah, you can see the church went on this crusade. They just killed all the men, put the women and kids into slavery, and burned everything in sight. So we don't have any records whatsoever of what they actually did.
Right.
This is all third hand, fourth hand, and it's in spite of the church, not because of the church. Maybe the church kept some stuff in the Vatican archives if we had a chance to ever look there. But the crusade launched in 1209. The majority of the Cathars were women, so they were the ones that were massacred. But a lot of times, whole towns went up. The one that's most cited is in Béziers, which I've actually been to. The Cistercian monk who was in charge was asked how to tell the difference between a heretic and a believer, and he was told, "Well, just kill them all. The Lord knows who they are, or His, and it'll all get sorted out there." So with that sort of mindset, you can imagine what in the world happened. They think 20,000 were killed in and around just Béziers itself, and the town was burned to the ground. Absolutely nothing left standing.
And that's supposed to be good Christianity.
Right. And they had the sack of Carcassonne. I've been to Carcassonne. If you ever want to go see what you think is an impregnable fortress, go see Carcassonne. It's unreal. This thing has got walls like you wouldn't believe, and moats, and it's just hard to believe that you could ever sack it. But somehow they ended up going in there and cleaning everybody out who was in there, and then all the villages around it. So the final place, Montsegur, in 1244, was under siege, and everyone was starving to death. And then all of the prefecti that were still left were burned alive on a large fire. And so it goes. And we'll just close with this. Joseph Campbell wrote A Hero with 1,000 Faces. He drew connections between modern dreams and myths, and started to touch on these ideas of what we would call archetypes. And so there's a companion book now, The Heroine of 1,001 Faces, one more than 1,000 for men. So this goes through example after example of all of these different women heroines through history, most of which are totally marginalized. They get no credit for what's going on. So that is it. That is the survey of feminine, and you can see, I think you can see women, play a major role in all of these different faiths that we've encountered in different ways, going right back to the get-go. But they get written out. People go in and rewrite whatever was there, and it's gone, and so it goes. But we're we're now in the age of Aquarius, and so we'll see what happens. This is a different time, a turning point. We'll see where it goes.
It's supposed to be more egalitarian.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be true democracy and, well, they say brotherhood, but sisterhood as well.
Yeah. So anyway, we've only got a couple more classes. So if you've got anything you want us to cover, Bruce, give a yell. We've still got some material in the can that we can cover, and then that'll do it. We'll probably take the summer off while we regroup and do different things. But so, 2 more classes, give it some thought, whatever you want to hear, we'll give it a shot.
Okay.
Okay.
Anything else that you'd like to say too?
Well, I know I'm looking at the history of the understanding of consciousness as a whole. I mean, sort of what they did is that they, at some point, where Adam and Eve, where women caused the fall of man, is to me a very negative view of consciousness.
It's propaganda. What it really was is that she initiated him. It was that she knew the teachings of the tree of life and introduced him. So then it was distorted to be this,
Right.
the story of her, quote unquote, corrupting him. But she was, in Kabbalistic terms, inviting him to individuation, as opposed to what we call the amniotic unity, which is a kind of infantile or pre-infantile unity. Whereas in Kabbalah, the fall is the beginning of a process. It's a liberation that allows the interplay to happen. So I think in that way it was seen as an empowerment that she had and was able to share with Adam. And then that got distorted, you know, but it's like your life really begins when you leave the sandbox, you know, when you leave the safety of this
Yeah, well, I just
utopian.
go back to what Ron said repeatedly, which was you read these things, and he was there for many of them, and they just read like fairy tales. There's no relationship to what really happened there.
Yeah, right.
It's just been rewritten, distorted, you name it.
But in terms of the Western mind, or the concept of consciousness from the Middle East, is that you know, they blame it on women for the fall of man. But what the consequences that I'm sort of reading from it, I mean, it was a political social movement at the time of controlling people by saying that there's something wrong with their mind. I mean, it's really weird.
Yeah.
And one of the problems of what came out of that, in a sense, was a scientific method.
Right.
Where you don't trust the mind, you have to prove it on the outer by an experiment.
Yeah, but that's where they get in this conundrum now, Ron, where they've now realized that they've been able to measure 5% of the universe.
Yeah, you know.
And the mind is an instrument. You're using the instrument in question to look at the instrument. You know, you're not going to get very far that way. Use that part of the intellect.
Yeah. But basically, you're starting off with the mind is not pure. But in terms of the Buddhist understanding, your mind is already pure. And all you have to do is, you know, meditate for 20, 30 years, and you get past it, you know, sort of idea, which is a much more positive view of the mind. You know, I mean, they have this concept of where you're a born sinner because your mother had to have sex to conceive you. I mean, how insane can you get? But
Yeah.
as a view of consciousness, it's you know, had serious consequences in the West.
I think it was a means of enslavement. You know, they've just kind of fed people this story, this propaganda, this trance that made them slaves.
Yeah, follow what we teach you, because in the afterlife it'll all be fixed. You know, and and you have the counterexample to all this of Jesus of Nazareth, who wasn't born of a woman. It was a virgin birth. And on top of that, he learned to meditate probably when he was probably able to meditate when he was 5 years old. at incredible levels, okay? But that's why you cite him as the exception. There had to be others.
Yeah.
So anyway, have a good weekend.
Okay.
Enjoy.
See you next week.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.